My name's Will Beecham. I'm ICE's Chemical Business Deputy Editor, and I'm here with Paul Hodges, Chairman of International Echem. Hello, Paul.
Hello, Will.
It's good to talk to you again, Paul. You've written us an interesting article ahead of EPCA meeting where you describe how major paradigm shifts are affecting demand patterns in some of the chemical industry's major markets, and how we can't, for planning purposes, rely on GDP plus as we could in years gone by. One of the key markets that you pick out is automotive, which I've known we've been reporting double-digit falls in sales, for example, in automotive in some really big markets. What's going on in the automotive sector, Paul?
Well, I think two things are going on. One, as you say, is that we're in the middle of we're at the start of a market downturn, and so typically, you have short-term downturns, which might be 5 or 10%, or you have longer-term ones which would go down 30 or 40%. If you look back in history, and it seems pretty clear that we're at the start of one of those now. That it's going to be a big drop, and we're seeing 20% drops in places like India, 10-12% drops in China. China massively important because it's the largest market in the world, and weakening markets elsewhere. So I think we've got to batten down the hatches and assume that the auto market is going to be pretty difficult now for the next 2 or 3 years at least. But that's only part of the story, because the other part of the story, and probably medium term much more important, is the shift away now from the internal combustion engine that we've grown up with, the gasoline engines, the diesels, to electric vehicles. And incumbents are very bad at predicting change. But if you go back in history, the change from horse-drawn carriages to horseless carriages, cars, took about 10 years. And only 10 years, that complete more or less completely wiped out of the horse industry in the major cities and so on, and in the West, and its replacement by cars. And the reason is that once you get to a tipping point, and we're now, VW have announced this month with their ID.3 car that they've got the battery cost down to $100 a kilowatt hour. Now that means if you're buying a car in the sort of luxury executive class range, 30,000 euros, $35,000, that sort of area, it's now more cost effective for you to buy an EV than it is to buy a gasoline or diesel car. That is critically important, because buyers, obviously, you buy it and then you expect to resell it. And so once you realise that you're not going to be able to resell it at a reasonable number, then the tipping point arrives, and it all happens very quickly. And just as an example of that, we've seen this in Europe with diesel and the problem of dieselisation. And if you go back 3 years, the diesel cars were more than half of the European market. Today, they're only just around a third. So over that period, and if you're trying to sell a diesel car today in the second-hand market, you'll be very lucky to get a sale, because people just don't want them anymore.
So if there is a quick shift to electric vehicles, does that have what kind of implications does that have for chemicals demand? Do they require? I know they're a lot simpler in terms of mechanics. Do they require different materials or less materials? Has anyone worked that out yet?
If you go out and look under the hood of your car, what you see is an awful lot of chemicals there which won't be needed in the future. So the black covering, the nylon, for example, and all the chemicals there, the antifreeze and so on. There's around 2,000 parts in the drivetrain in an internal combustion engine. In a battery EV operated, there's around 20. So it's absolutely, a real paradigm shift here. Now, which is not to say that there aren't opportunities for the chemicals and plastics industry with EVs. Of course, there are major opportunities, but there are also areas where the market will just disappear. As I say, if you go back 100 years and you had a big position supplying horse-drawn carriages, well, 10 years later, it wasn't worth very much. So, and I think there is an issue here that incumbents, and we're all incumbents, just move. They find it very difficult to understand the pace of change. And once the pace of change gets going like this, at a tipping point, it moves very fast. And if you haven't got got started on it, you're just going to get left behind. And of course, if you combine the two, that sales are going down anyway, if you don't start to move now while the market is still giving some reasonable profits, you don't start to spend those profits on developing the new product mix that you need, well, in a year's time, you may not be able to afford it. This is the problem. You're going to end up with winners and losers.
How about the plastics sector? There seems to be a lot of change going on there with the introduction of single-use plastic bag bans coming in. There seems to be a price war in polyethylene at the moment. Can you make any comments on your outlook for the polymer sector?
Again, there are this number of paradigm shifts which are all coming along together, and obviously all related in the end to demographics. But here you are. You've now got public opinion really around the world sensitized to the problems of single-use packaging, and just everybody, sports clubs, and people you would never have thought would be interested and bothered about this. I've moved. I went to the cricket this month at the Oval Test match against Australia, and it's gone completely single plastic free. You can't buy a beer now in a plastic cup. It's a reusable cup, and you pay a deposit for it, and so on. So not in the ground, and there's 28,000 people there. They are not using any single-use plastic, and that's a cricket ground. So this has really happened, and it isn't going back. So and again, if you therefore look, what we've got is really a very difficult position, because you've got all this new production coming from the States, which doesn't have a market to go to. It can't go in the States because the US market's been static for 20 years. Most of it was supposed to be going to China. Whether it ever would have got another question, but it's not going now with tariffs. Maybe some of the tariffs will come off, maybe not. But China's changed its relationship with the States, and it's going to become self-sufficient. So it's not going to go in that area. So it's coming into Europe. We've got this major price war going on, and of course, the issue here is that it's coming into a market which by 2025 probably doesn't want it. In terms of single-use plastic, you can look at the deadlines, and you can look at the consumer products companies, the brand owners, and so on, and they are under such massive pressure. Now, I mean, the companies accounting for 20% of world plastic consumption have signed up now to the Ellen MacArthur's global commitments, which says all the plastic they use will be reusable, recyclable, or compostable. All of it. And the consumer is pushing them to do that. So, if you're setting out to sell polyethylene made of virgin feedstock, you've got a really uphill battle. And even what's the price at which you're going to be able to sell it? I don't know, because again, it's going to be like a diesel car. Who wants it?
Yeah, I mean, the figures are quite astonishing, aren't they? I looked them up before this interview, and according to our supply and demand database, the US is adding 4.4 million tons of polyethylene capacity from 2019 to 21. China is adding 7.7 over the same period. So, we're worried about this US wave. Actually, 2020, there's a huge wave of Chinese capacity coming on stream too. Yeah. And amongst all of this change, chemical companies obviously have to find a way forward, find a new strategy. Can you give any advice for how companies can thrive with all this change? You mentioned
this is a really interesting bit, and of course there are problems out there and so on, but we go through problems. That's part of running an important business like chemicals, third largest industry in the world. You're going to have challenges like that, but there are massive opportunities. The key thing underneath all of this is the demographics, that you come back time and time again to the change that's taken place in demand. That when we were all growing up, it was very clear, the key market for you was the wealth creators, the 25 to 54-year-olds. And there weren't many, there were younger people, there were lots of babies, of course, but there weren't many older people. You got to pension age, you got your gold watch, you died. So it didn't, to be blunt, it didn't count in the economy. Today, you've got a third of the European economy is people over the age of 55. They are not having children. They are a replacement economy. They have everything they need. If something goes wrong, they replace it. And of course, they're coming into retirement, so they have less money. They're not earning anymore. So, and they're more than twice the percentage of 1950. 1950, just a generation or so ago. So you've got this massive change. Now, what products and services do we have in the chemical industry for people aged over 55? Zilch. We've never thought about it. We've always focused on the wealth creators. Let's sell them more cars, let's sell them more housing, let's sell them more and so on and so forth, and stuff for their kids. We've never thought for a minute about what are we going to sell to people who are aged over 55 who've got 25 or 30 years life ahead of them, and actually they do have a bit of cash if you had something they wanted to buy. Now, if we as an industry can't make something out of that, well, somebody else had better come in and do our job for us.
You mentioned sustainability and affordability. Does that tie in with what you're saying?
But it is. I mean, if you are a replacement economy, what do you want? You want sustainability. You want to do more with less. It allies itself obviously with concern about climate change and everything else. But so you've got two drivers going on there at the same time. You've got the big concerns, escalating concerns about climate change and CO2 levels and so on. So that is terrifically important in its own right. But underline that with a third of your European population now actually, not having that much money and not needing a lot of new things. So affordability. We really were in what you might call the affordable luxury area. That the mid-range things, you couldn't afford the Rolls Royce, but you would want the Ford or the VW with the bells and whistles on it. Well, we're moving away from that. We're moving away from large, the bulk manufacturing. We're moving back with the circular economy and sustainability to local manufacturing. Now, of course, all change is uncomfortable. Exactly. But what's more uncomfortable is trying to ignore it.
Paul, as ever, it's great to talk to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Will.